What time of day was Jesus crucified? Well, if you've watched some of our shorts before, you can probably guess that the answer is not quite as simple as you would think. And you'd be correct. Hey everyone, I'm Colin, the resident nerd and Bible scholar here at the Bible Uncut and Unfiltered. If you watched last week's short where I talked about what day Jesus was crucified and how Passover fits into that, what day of the week Passover was in the Passion narrative, you'll get a little bit of a feel of where we're going with this today, because once again, the difference comes down to the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke all agreeing, and then John being the odd man out. And in particular, the difference is going to come down to Mark versus John here. See, Matthew, Mark, and Luke all mention a darkness that comes over the land when Jesus is crucified, and they say it was from the 6th hour until the 9th hour. Now remember, measuring time was a little bit different back then, so for us that would basically mean from about noon to 3 p.m. So Jesus is already on the cross, darkness has come over the land from noon to 3 p.m. on Friday. Mark is the only one to mention when Jesus was first crucified, so there was a period before the darkness came that Jesus was still on the cross. Mark says it was in the 3rd hour that they crucified him. So that means that, according to Mark, Jesus was crucified at 9 a.m., he hung on the cross for 3 hours, and then darkness came over the land for another 3 hours. John, however, complicates the matter, because that's what he's good at doing. In John's account, this is very specifically John 19:14, he records that Jesus was still on trial in the 6th hour. So right when Matthew, Mark, and Luke say that darkness came over the land, and Mark has told us that Jesus was already on the cross for 3 hours, that is exactly when John says that Pilate ordered Jesus to be crucified. So that is the end of the trial in John's account. So John has Jesus being crucified at least 3 hours later than the synoptics. So what do we do with that? Well, as you can imagine, I am not the first person to bring this up in 2,000 years of Christian history, so there is a long tradition of various means of trying to get these texts to work together. Honestly, I don't think that any of them are very convincing, but here's a few of the more popular ones. Some scholars will suggest that maybe John just miscopied it. Maybe if he had one of the synoptics as his source, and maybe if he saw Mark say a 3rd hour, maybe he just accidentally put 6th instead. Maybe he miscopied. Now, if we're going to be honest, that is possible. I realize not a lot of Christians are going to be thrilled with the idea that John could have made a mistake there, but we have to be honest about our text and not just make assumptions based on our own beliefs. It is possible, but it's just not a very satisfactory option. There's also the possibility that John could have just been working with a different tradition. I mean, we see this across all 4 gospel accounts where there are slightly different versions of the stories that indicate to us that there are different traditions of what exactly Jesus said and did. A second option that is not very popular, but some people have suggested, is that maybe that little bit in Mark about Jesus being crucified in the 3rd hour was a later addition. Now, there's really no reason to think that, aside from Mark is the only one to say that, and that is the part that really problematizes the text. So if you take that out, you don't have the problem. But it's not really great scholarship to just take out something because it causes an issue. A third explanation that some people have leaned on is that perhaps John was using a different way of telling time, that Mark might have been using a Jewish clock and John a Roman clock. There could be something to this, because in the beginning of John chapter 1 verse 39, he has Jesus speaking in the 10th hour to a crowd. And if you're using the Jewish clock, that would be about 4 a.m., which is a little weird. But if you're using the Roman way of telling time, like we're familiar with, that would be 10 a.m., which would arguably make more sense. So if that's the case, that would mean that when Pilate sentences Jesus to be crucified in the 6th hour, that would actually be 6 a.m. by John's rendering. At that point, you then have 3 hours for Jesus to be crucified before we get to when Mark said it happened at 9 a.m. So that's a good bit of time, but it would be possible. I'm not 100% convinced by that perspective yet, but I think it is definitely possible. One other option I'll just throw in there too is we have differing accounts of Jesus' life. So it's possible that John may have just been drawing from a different tradition that had Jesus crucified at a slightly different time of day. And as much as that can make some of us uncomfortable, Again, we have 4 different gospel accounts, and they do differ a little bit in the details of what Jesus said and did. So if it doesn't bother us that we have 4 different gospels in the first place, it shouldn't bother us that there may have been slightly different traditions about when Jesus was crucified. But much like with last week, regardless of what time you think it was exactly that Jesus was crucified, the main point is that at some point on Friday morning, he was crucified. He was taken off of the cross before Friday evening so that Sabbath could happen. But regardless of exactly what hour you think Jesus was crucified, the general story remains the same, that he was crucified on Friday morning, taken off the cross before Friday evening, was in the grave Saturday, rose again on Sunday, and that in some way his death exemplifies the very Christian belief that death brings forth new life and new beginnings.